Welcome to The Struggle is Real, a show for 20-somethings that are trying to figure out adulting. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Each episode, we focus on solving a problem that we will face throughout this defining decade that wasn't covered in the classroom. This could include topics about our career, health, relationships, and money. Let's get into it. Something you'll probably have to deal with in your 20s is apartment hunting. For some, online searching and taking tours is exciting. For myself, it's exhausting. You find the perfect place. The floor plan works for you and your roommates. It has the amenities you were hoping for, and it's close enough to the area you want to live. That's when you check the most important factor. How much does it cost? If you have my luck, it's just outside your budget, but your move-out date is quickly approaching and you haven't found a viable alternative, so you sign anyway. But what if you simply negotiate a better deal with your landlord? You can do that? Yes. And in fact, my guest today is here to teach you how. Since 2003, Justin Pogue has developed and managed apartments, rental homes, and student housing across the United States. Seldomly has he had to negotiate with tenants, but who could blame them? There's a general misunderstanding and lack of resources around this topic. That's when Justin decided to fill the void and wrote Rental Secrets: Reduce Your Rent, Get Better Value, and Create Quality Communities. In his book, Justin shares stories about his landlording experience and the inside scoop on the real estate industry so renters like you are better equipped to negotiate your next lease. I'm excited to share this episode as it's packed with so many takeaways that will hopefully help you in the near future. Let's get into it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the author and real estate expert, Justin Pogue. Justin, welcome into The Struggle is Real. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. This is actually a really timely topic for me. I'm going through my lease renewal right now, so it was super helpful to read your book. I have to admit, I never really considered negotiating my lease. I've priced a lease out, or I priced out properties before. I've gone out to the market to make sure there's nothing out there that's more affordable, but I never really thought about negotiating a lease with an individual like I would my salary or something. Is that common?
It is very common for people not to consider that, because when you think about when you're going through college and there's no class on leasing your first apartment, even though that's like the very next step that you're going to do when you finish college. Like, they don't cover that along with a bunch of other practical stuff, but that they certainly don't cover. So people feel like they're at this disadvantage when they go and talk to landlords. So they feel like, I can't even bring up the topic of negotiation. So it's very common, and it's unfortunate that it is, because you really can negotiate.
Yeah, I almost felt powerless. Like, it's like you have to take whatever deal is on the table there. It's like either you like the price or you don't, which is why I love that you use like this paradox with each one of your chapters as like the power of, and then it mentions something else. It's like you're almost empowering the renter, or showcasing the fact that they do have some power in this negotiation. Was that intentional?
Yes, that was absolutely intentional. When you look at the process of being a landlord, which I've been a landlord for 15 plus years, going on 20 years now, they're investing in a property so that renters will choose their property and then pay them rent. If no renters choose their property, they are pretty much SOL, and they're sitting on a useless product. But most people don't understand that, because they're thinking about it from a consumer standpoint, not from a producer standpoint. So if you break it down a little bit, what is the landlord actually selling? They're selling a product that is composed of equal parts space and time. And every day that apartment sits vacant, they are losing money. And it's not just that they're losing money, it's money they're losing that they can never get back. I can't rent you use of an apartment from last week. Like, nobody is that dense that they're going to pay to rent an apartment from last week. But it's very different than, say, compared to like a car dealership, right? If I have a car and I don't sell it today, I can sell it tomorrow. There's not really much cost there. But for the landlord, like, that day of rent is gone forever. It's never coming back. So it creates this bias towards action on the landlord's part to get the property rented as soon as possible.
Mm.
And that's part of where the renter's power comes from.
Yeah. And that made so much sense to me whenever I started researching you. I was like, of course, I actually see there's more negotiation power as like through your example with your lease than maybe whenever you're negotiating your car. Yet everybody considers negotiating their next car. How many people really consider negotiating their next lease? I'm kind of curious. And throughout, being a landlord and property management yourself, how often did people actually negotiate the lease?
Almost never.
Really?
There were a few times where people would come in and say, well, um, if I pay 4 months in advance all at once, can I get some kind of discount? There have been a couple of people who've done something like that. But it's pretty rare because most people don't have 4 months worth of rent just sitting around waiting to make that kind of deal. Um, there have been a couple of people who've negotiated on the monthly cost of a parking space related to their apartment. There have been a couple of people who've done that. But it's pretty rare for people to actually come in and negotiate with a landlord. And some of that is because of what we talked about before, where there's no classes and the other thing. But there's also this. Sometimes people have a tendency to wait till the last minute, which means that they really feel like I need to have this problem solved right now, and I don't really have time to negotiate because what if they say no? So that's part of it. So I have seen people where they're like, especially when they're moving to a new city, right? They'll fly in, they'll allocate one day, they're going to visit like 10 properties. They do this whirlwind tour and they're visiting all these properties and they're going to choose one by the end of the day. Like, you're setting yourself up to fail in terms of being able to negotiate when you do it that way, because you're not leaving yourself any time for that process to play out, because you need the keys like right away.
Yep.
So that's one reason. That's one way people kind of set themselves up to fail. But there are other things too. There are like sometimes even the language that landlords use can make people feel like they can't negotiate. So one industry phrase that's very common is, our rents are competitive with the market. Mm. And it's a great phrase. Like, it makes you feel like, oh, they've done all the research for me. I can't find a better deal. It's going to be great. But it doesn't really mean what you think it means, because they're doing research from their perspective. So what that means is they took out a map, they stuck a pin in where their property was, and then they drew a circle around it, radius of maybe a mile or so. And they chose the competing properties, that the properties that they feel they compete with, that are within that circle. And matching up similar amenities and that kind of thing. Okay. It has nothing to do with you. They don't even know who you are yet. They haven't met you. They don't know what your needs are. They don't know where your job is. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with who they consider their competition to be. So your job may be in a location where there are other properties that would be meaningful for you that they're not considering because it doesn't fit in their nice, neat little circle. So while the phrasing sounds really great, it doesn't really mean anything to you personally as an individual who's going through this process of finding an apartment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally agree with that. Whenever I went in to have the conversation about negotiating my lease as well, they brought up the we're competitive with the rest of the market. And I simply asked, because I just read your book, what does that mean? What is the market? Like, what is that scope? And come to find out, it's like a scope of 8 properties within, the mile or 2 radius around here. And I was like, I have more flexibility in that. I essentially, anywhere in Austin, I'm pretty open to moving to. So that radius for me might be a 15 or 20 mile radius all the way around the center of Austin. For them, no,
Yeah.
it was much, much different. So
Yeah.
it was cool. I really liked that piece to it. You brought a lot of kind of like the inside behind the scenes conversation with your book. Before we get into a lot of the negotiation tips, though, let's talk about your career. What led up to you writing this book? Did you always want to get into property management and real estate investing?
Absolutely not. So this whole saga started when I left the first job I had after college. So my first job after college was managing security guards. So I had like 80 security guards that I managed across 15 different corporate campuses. Did that for 3 years. And I'm like, this is a 24/7 gig. Like, it's stressing me out. Like, I want to make a move. So I decided I was going to go to graduate school, get my MBA, and I was going to shift into management consulting. So I was going to become one of those people who, you put on the cape, they drop you into a company, you solve all their problems, and then you move on to the next one. And that process was going great. Got into the school I wanted to, started doing mock interviews for the management consulting industry, all that, picked the company I want, got the internship, like we were on our way. But this was 2000, 2001, and some of your audience may know that was when the dot-com bubble actually burst, and a lot of their parents may have been losing their jobs or what have you at that point in time. And the management consulting industry, it just fell apart completely. Like, it wasn't even that they weren't hiring, it was that we are firing people we already hired. Thank you very much for buying a house near our office. We no longer need your services. So that's what I graduated into. And I just kind of came back home and started trying to figure out what I wanted to do next and whatever. And incidentally, my mother had just started researching how to buy properties through tax liens. And she was like, well, let's go check this out. And Florida was a state to do it in. So we took a road trip from California to Florida, and we kind of went county by county looking at what properties were available, how could we, what was required to get them, blah, blah, blah. And we ended up buying a few properties and then flipping those properties to developers to then go on and build. And we were like, yeah, that was great. That was fun. We made a little money. That was nice. But what about like ongoing residual income from all this effort that we're putting in? And that's what led us to start buying multifamily properties. And that took us from 0 units all the way up to 72 units at what became our peak.
What was that time span?
So the time span in terms of 0 to 72 was 2003 through 2008. Yeah, 2003, 2000 to about 2008. And then, of course, the Great Recession and all that stuff kicks in, and everybody's trying to figure out their new plan because the old plan has been shot to hell. But yeah, so that was the time frame. That was the time frame on that. But in acquiring all of these rental units, now it's like, okay, well, how are we going to manage this stuff? And that's where the property management aspect kicked in. So my career has been property management, real estate investing, and a lot of the things that we bought, they were like the worst properties in decent neighborhoods. So it also meant like, you got to learn some construction stuff. You got to learn how to hang drywall and lay tile and figure out the layout of the cabinets in the kitchen and what kind of flow each of these units needs to have and that kind of thing. So in a way, my career is a lot of like kind of jack of all trades, because we're looking at property development, we're looking at construction, we're looking at investing, we're looking at insurance, property insurance and that kind of thing. We're looking at financing and investing in all of this stuff. So I've learned to speak a lot of different languages in and around real estate. And it's made my career kind of unique. Because a lot of people in real estate, they get siloed. They're either a realtor or they do real estate insurance or they do real estate mortgages and that kind of thing. Um, but I kind of have this across the board kind of experience because that's what was needed in the role that I ended up taking on.
So, did you do this all with your mom? Was your mom with you from 0 to 72?
Yep, she was there all the way from 0 to 72, and I mean, and it wasn't like, okay, she's done this for 40 years and now we're doing it together. We were learning as we went. Um, Fun little fact, she had been a realtor in the 80s. It never took off as a career for her, but she had that experience. But realtors don't actually know much more than just how to do the transaction. That's what they're taught. That's what getting a real estate license means. Nothing about investing, nothing about construction, nothing about property management. None of those things are actually covered in the training to become a realtor. If they have that, they got that somewhere else. So people assume that realtors have all of that stuff just because they have that realtor title, and they don't. It doesn't come with that.
Yeah. And what I was picking up when I was doing some research, I was listening to you talk about 2003 through 2008, your experience with your mom. She must have had a huge impact on you. And I think if I remember right, your dad was a programmer at IBM, but your mom's always been this like entrepreneur, let's
Oh yeah.
make things work, like let's just solve problems as they come. Do I have this right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. It's like dad was like, okay, I'm going to be the breadwinner. I'm going to support everybody, and that's going to be my focus. Mom was like, okay, let's get out there and see what we can do. Um, so she had tried a number of different businesses. So I already mentioned that she had tried her hand at being a realtor. Um, and then at one point, she and one of her friends were going to start a greeting card business. She ran a print shop for a while, like doing like flyers and business cards and that kind of thing for people. She tried a bunch of different like multi-level marketing things. So she was the one who was always out there like, let's give this a shot. Let's see if we can make this work. Let's see if we can figure this out.
Hmm.
And this real estate adventure, the road trip down to Florida was just another one of those things. So from my perspective, it seemed really normal, like, oh yeah, let's go on a road trip, like why not? And other people will be like, wait, you drove from California to Florida to look at properties on the land's available tax lien list? Like what, who does that?
You and your mom.
We do that.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, it was really cool. I loved listening to you talk about your mom. I also thought it painted the picture of a typical real estate investor as well, because you often talk about these real estate investors aren't people that have tons and tons of money that are sipping martinis on their yacht while they just collect boatloads of money of rent through renters. Like many landlords are small time real estate investors. They probably have some other side gig going on. They might have, 1 to a dozen properties, and they're trying to make things work just as much as we're trying to make things work, which
Yeah.
I think gives that gray area in terms of negotiation. Before we get into to transition into that though, I do want you to tell this like great story that I heard you talk about. And I can't remember. I think there was like you talked about some flooding as well, but I don't think it related to this. You had to go and replace, I think, a refrigerator at one of your properties.
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about?
yeah.
Can you tell me that story before we get into the actual negotiation tips?
Yeah. So when you when you invest in a property, you take on all the full responsibility for the property. Like everything that goes wrong with the property is your baby. So we had this 1 month where like everything was like we had to replace a bunch of appliances, like even like the main electrical box to one of the buildings went out and we had to replace that. And that's like, you know, 8 to 10 grand that we really weren't planning on spending. Like the stress level that month was like 11 out of 10. And then this one lady calls up and she says her refrigerator is broken. And like, I'm feeling like this is like the straw that just breaks the camel's back for me, like emotionally. Like, I'm going down to Lowe's. I'm going to buy this refrigerator and I'm thinking about all of this stuff that's in my head, about, you know, what's going on this month and all of that. Get down to Lowe's, buy the refrigerator, we load it up, and I'm driving back to the apartment building. And as I'm driving back, I look up in the rearview mirror and I see the refrigerator that I just bought flying out of the back of the truck. Like this, you know, when negative things happen, and it just felt like it was happening in slow motion. And in my head, I'm like, no. So I pull over to the side of the road. Luckily, the refrigerator doesn't hit anybody else. It lands on the side of the road, and now the refrigerator is supposed to be like this rectangular box. Well, now my box has this, one of the corners is smashed in. And it's the one of the rear corners at the top of the refrigerator. So I'm like, okay, great. So now I don't even know if this thing still works. We're definitely like, the warranty is shot at this point. So I drive it back to the apartment building. And luckily the space that it's going into has cabinetry built around it. So you can't really see that back corner once it's installed. So we go ahead and install the refrigerator, plug it in. Luckily, it actually still works. And kind of the moral of the whole story is like, you might be stressed out about whatever else is going on, but like, you have to be in that moment. Your mind has to be on what you're doing at that point in time. Because if it's not, you can end up in a far worse situation. Like that refrigerator could have not worked. Mm-hmm. And which would have meant, on top of everything else I had spent that month, I'd have to pay for a refrigerator twice. And there's nothing a real estate investor hates more than paying for the same thing twice. Or when it flew off the truck, it could have hit somebody else's car. Like there could have been injury. Like it could have snowballed into massive tragedy. Just because my mind was on all of the stressful things that had gone on that month instead of on getting this refrigerator from Lowe's to the apartment building in one piece.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, that I really just wanted to paint or illustrate the picture of the traditional landlord. It sounds like, and I have some friends that do some real estate investing as well. They all have these just tragic stories just like that. So let's transition into some of the tangibles now. And let's start with someone who is looking for a new property. Let it be an apartment or a home. They're a new renter. They're trying to find where they're going to be next. Is there a time that is best for looking for a new rental? Is the summer months or the winter months, one of them lean?
Absolutely, there's a best time, and it does vary a little bit depending on what city you're in, but generally speaking, late fall into winter is when you want to be looking for an apartment. Because what happens is people graduate from school in May and June. They're all out looking for apartments. People who are already out in the rental market, if they want to move, they're trying to get situated before the school year starts in August and September. So May, June, July, August, those are big months where a lot of people move. And landlords know this, and they charge more during those periods of time because there's all this churn going on. But if you fast forward into, November, December, January, it's cold, it's wet. Nobody really wants to be out looking for apartments, in that weather. But vacancies are still happening. Like there's still churn going on. And as we kind of talked about before, every day that it's vacant, they're losing money that they can't get back. So they're not going to wait until May comes around again to rent it. They want to rent it as soon as possible. But there are a lot fewer people looking. So that means that discounts are available. In fact, there's a company, I believe they're called Rent Hopper, and they do a survey every year. And I mean, the savings of timing, when you look for an apartment can be as high as 7%.
Wow.
Which, I mean, if your rent's $1,000, like that's $70.
Mm-hmm.
That's grocery money. That's car payment money. That's real money that you can use for a bunch of other stuff. I mean, investing or saving or whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I have a couple roommates, but mine is far more than $1,000 as well. I mean, having an extra $200 or $300 in my pocket would be really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, while we're on the subject of roommates, that's another great strategy. I didn't put in the book because I was focusing on individuals. But roommates is another great strategy, not only to cut down on your personal outlay in terms of rent, but if you can get into the right situation, there are other networking and social benefits that you can get from having roommates as well. As long as they're the right people and everybody gets along, that can be a hugely successful way to start out your renting life.
And is it relative? Do you get a cost savings going from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom? Does it fall off a little bit? I mean, I guess every apartment has to have a kitchen. So, I mean, you're dividing a kitchen by 3.
Right.
Obviously the square footage has got to be a little bit less.
Right. So every time you add a bedroom, you're not necessarily adding a kitchen. You're not necessarily adding a living room. You're not necessarily adding a bathroom. So the cost of those things get split. So going from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, your rent will not double. Okay. But if you're sticking with the roommate situation, if you get that second roommate, you have someone who's bringing like another full income to your situation. And your costs haven't gone up. Your costs haven't gone up by the same percentage.
I think that makes sense. So if you were to start a new search for a rental for yourself, how would you go about sourcing potential properties? Is there a great website to go to, or do you have other methods being inside the industry, knowing how people can go find these?
Well, even before we start getting on websites and searching, it's important to understand like what it is that you actually want and need. Do I need to be on the second floor? Because some people do need to be on the second floor, because if you're on the first floor, you have kids running up and in the apartment above you. You might be trying to be a podcaster or whatever it is you're trying to work on, and it's extra noise that you don't need. But some people, it doesn't matter to them because they're not going to be home most of the time anyway, because they travel for work or whatever their situation is. Or do I really need to be near the swimming pool, or do I need to be near the laundry room? So these are questions that people need to ask themselves and answer even before they start going to look. Because what happens when you start to go to look is people are going to start asking you questions, and typically the conversation is going to go something like this. And you call up and you'll ask for a 2-bedroom apartment, and they'll say, great, we have 2-bedroom apartments available. And then they'll ask you a series of questions. Would you like to be near the courtyard of the swimming pool? Would you like to be on the second floor? Would you like to be near the laundry room? They'll ask you the series of questions. It's important for you to know what your must-haves are so you can answer those questions properly, as opposed to based on, wants or wishes. Because what's happening is, as you're answering those questions, they are crossing apartments that might be available off the list. So they're not even going to tell you about those because you've self-selected out of them, which means that at the end of the conversation, it's like, great, we have one apartment that fits your needs. How soon can you get down here? You're like, well, they only got one. I can't negotiate now. They may have had 10, they just didn't fit all these particular answers that you gave them when you were answering those questions. So it's important to start out with, what is it that I want? What do I need? What am I specifically looking for? What are deal breakers for me? And start there. Once you do that, then you're going to start looking on these different websites, and there's plenty of them. Understand that some of these websites are designed from the landlord's point of view, meaning that certain properties have been able to pay to, get higher rankings and show up sooner or show up more prominently, that kind of thing. So there's that. And then there's also the, sites like, Craigslist, which is like classified ads. You can't pay to get ranked higher. You rank wherever you rank, and that's where you're at. Those are good. Like Craigslist is a good place to find these smaller, like mom and pop landlords that are much easier to work with. They're not going through some central office. They don't have like they don't have some kind of, net income metric that they're trying to make for this quarter kind of thing. And those are folks that are tend to be easier to work with, the smaller landlords.
Yeah. And to build on what you were mentioning too, I've had, not even being close to a pool, but having a pool as an amenity severely overcompensated that in terms of what I thought I wanted, and then severely underutilized it whenever, push came to shove. Like I have pool access right now. I've been in our pool 3 times, I think, almost over a year. And I've had pool access maybe 4 times, like 4 years out of the last 10. And I always find I underutilize it. But whenever I'm getting on a property, looking around a property, I'm like, oh, they have a pool. That's so awesome. Like, and I overvalue that piece to it.
Absolutely. Like it's the visual, like you walk onto the property, you see the pool and the building behind it. Like, it's like, okay, this is what I worked so hard for when I was in college is like what comes to mind. Like that's what jumps out. But and when you talk to people when they're looking for apartments, you think like the pool would be full of people like every day. Like there would be competition. Like we got to schedule people's pool time, as the property manager. And that's not what's happening. People aren't using it. And with the on-site gym, like it's even worse. Like almost nobody is using that, even though when they're doing their calculus on renting the apartment, they're like, oh yeah, they have a gym, so I can get rid of my gym membership and that'll save me $25 a month. So that makes this apartment cheaper than this other one over there. Like, even though it's a calculus that they're doing in their head initially, like they're not using the gym, they're not getting let's be honest, they probably weren't using the gym membership they were paying for anyway. But
that's another conversation though. Actually, I can attest to that too. I use our on-site gym a ton. I am pretty much, almost every time I'm in the gym, it's me and maybe one other person. And we have, this is a big apartment complex. We have 11 buildings, probably at least 50 people in each building here. So, we have like a good size property here. We have a couple hundred people for sure at this property. And it's, I compete with maybe one other guy that's in there, and somebody might come on and get on the treadmill as well.
Yeah, well, let's break down this amenity thing even further, because in the kind of behind the scenes, there's this thing called amenity-based pricing. So each apartment is based not only on the amenities that are available in the apartment community, it's also based on their proximity to said amenities. The closer you are to a swimming pool, the higher the rent on that apartment, because you're closer to that amenity. So all the amenities on the property are priced into your rent. There are basically what I call amenity wars going on, where when companies are creating apartment buildings, they're adding all kinds of stuff. Like I've seen rooftop pool decks with wall-sized televisions on them. Like that's built into your rent. How often are you going to use that? Probably maybe once a year. Like Super Bowl season, probably maybe. They have, they've arranged for like, food trucks to come on site, and they've set up specific areas for that. They have on-site playgrounds for kids, which is great, unless there's a community playground a block away that you could use, and you end up paying for both because one's built into your rent, the other one's built into your taxes. So really think about what amenities you will actually use. Like in your situation, the gym is probably sounds like it's a good amenity to have because it's something that you actually use, and it's worth paying that, that month, making that monthly payment as part of your rent to use the gym. The pool, not so much.
Something we were getting into talking about earlier, I think you were kind of dancing around it, was this vacancy piece to it, and how much valuable these vacant properties or vacant units become as they're sitting longer and longer. Because as you mentioned, you can't recoup that money. The leasing agent now becomes a superstar if they're able to fill some of those vacant properties. How do you go about, and you have some really specific language around this, and that's the language I want to hear. How do you go about finding or uncovering those hidden gems?
When you're having that initial conversation with the leasing agent, and they want to take you down this road of, do you want this or do you want that? Do you want the other? Like, skip over all of that and ask to see their list of vacant units. That list will show you what's vacant now, what's coming up. And the reason why I say to ask for it is because legally, the property manager cannot steer you towards any specific unit. You can steer yourself by answering these questions, which is what's happening. But they can't say, this is the only apartment we have available when they have 10 others, and and they think this is the one for you. That way you can start seeing like what's vacant and what really all of your options are. Because the whole trick is they're trying to collapse the options, you're trying to expand them. Expanded options means more power for you as the renter. Collapsed options means less power for you as a renter, more power for them as the property manager or the landlord. So there's a lot of like psychological and marketing games that are going on in that conversation. Most people don't even realize that this is happening. Like they're just going through the experience. The other thing I suggest is when you're out there and you're on the tour and you're looking at apartments and you're in an apartment, you see, like the paint is nicked here, or the floorboards are nicked, or there's some funky thing over one of the windows due to fire code or whatever. And you're like, do I really want to rent this? Or do I even want to finish the tour? Actually, finish the tour. Absolutely finish the tour. And here's the reason why. All of those things have been deterrents for other people. So those things may be an indication that this apartment has been sitting vacant longer. And there are other things too, like if an apartment is on a busy street and you can hear a lot of street noise, that may also be an indication that it takes them longer to rent this particular type of apartment because of its placement on the property. Because every apartment is individual. It has its own unique, it's in its own unique space on the property, and it has its own unique issues and challenges. The trick is to use those issues and challenges as negotiation tactics later on when you're having a conversation about renting said apartment. So all of those little things are indications that it may be sitting, that apartment may have sat vacant longer than some of the other properties on there, on some of the other apartments on the property. I mean, I was managing one apartment complex in Mountain View, California, like stone's throw from Google. And I had an apartment sit vacant for 2 months because there was some covering over a window that had to be there due to fire code. And the people they would walk in, and it was in the master bedroom. They walk into the master bedroom, they walk to the doorway of the master bedroom, they'd see that, they turn around and walk out. unfortunately, that meant they didn't see the double closets. They didn't see the remodeled bathroom that we'd done for them. Like all of that stuff didn't exist for them because they never saw it. So that apartment sat vacant for 2 months. And in Mountain View, California at the time, like rents were like $3,000 a month. So every day that's vacant, property's losing $100 every day, like clockwork. Boom, 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 $100. You may as well, flush $100 down the drain. That's what was happening. So yeah, after like 30 days, which is, you've lost $3,000 that you can never get back. Like, yeah, I'm willing to make a deal. Like, I don't want to lose another $3,000. And so, and if you look at $3,000 divided by 12 months, is $250. So if I make a deal on monthly rent for anything less than, if I come down between $0 and $250 on the rent, I'm putting myself in a better situation. Like if I can just come down $100 and rent that place, I'm not losing another $3,000, and I come out better because I'm renting it now as opposed to waiting and hoping that somebody else comes in and doesn't find this fire code thing objectionable.
Yeah. How else can you collect information about a property outside of doing the tour with the leasing agent?
Talk to those who might be your potential future neighbors. These are folks who they've already signed the lease. They've already moved into the community. They don't get paid whether you rent or not. Like they don't care whether you rent or not, honestly. So they're going to give you their unvarnished opinion of the community, the neighborhood, the property management company, the property manager, the maintenance staff, whether, how they keep whether they actually keep the pool up and everything renting. They will give you all the goods on what's going on behind the scenes before you even rent there.
And how do you advise approaching that conversation? You don't pull over halfway through the tour and you see someone walking down and ask them some questions. What do you do? How do you get in front of them?
It's interesting. There's a couple tactics you can use. So one tactic is to actually, if you're in the middle of the tour and there is a resident there, you can stop and have that conversation with them and keep one eye on the resident as you're having that conversation, and keep the other eye on the leasing associate as you're having that conversation. Because if the property is being managed properly, the property manager should have no problem with you talking to the residents about what's going on the property, the experience that they're having, all of that. They should not be like antsy or look uncomfortable at all if they're doing their job. If they're not doing their job, then they might start looking a little antsy, which is good information to have, because if they're not doing their job, then there's some other kind of problem that's going on. But the other strategy is, after the tour is over, come back on the weekend or in the evening and just find, a random resident who's out there just parking their car or whatever and say, hey, look, I came on a tour of the property earlier. I'm interested in possibly renting here. Can you tell me about your experience? And kind of have that conversation. But there's other valuable reasons to come back after hours and or on the weekend. One is related to parking. So typically, you'll get a parking space with your apartment. And if you need to park a second car, they're like, oh yeah, there's plenty of street parking. Well, if you come back at 5 o'clock, you'll know if there's street parking or not. And you'll know where that street parking is located. Is it located on the street that you're actually planning on living on, or is it 3 miles away and you need to, bring some sneakers with you in the car in the morning? But also, if you come back on the weekend, you get to see how the pool is used. So, is the pool actually available for you to use, or is it full of, crazy screaming kids or whatever, on the weekend? Because if that's what's going on, then yeah, they have that amenity, but I can't really use it, so I shouldn't really factor that into my decision.
Yeah, I think the parking is a big one. Come back whenever you would typically be coming back from work. Is that challenging? Do you work nights? I was doing a job where I worked pretty late at night, and I was routinely getting home between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. And I found in my property in particular, there is no spots. I park all the way up to the top of the hill, and I have to walk down from that.
Hmm.
Wish I would have known that before I started renting the apartment. Probably could have saved myself at least that bit of knowledge. I don't know if it would deter me away from living here, but it would have been nice to know that if I would have just came back here late one evening at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and realized all the spots get filled after everyone gets home from work.
Yeah, yeah. But it also informs your decision on some apartment buildings have, paid designated parking spaces that are available. So if you're making a decision about should I actually pay for a space that's designated for me, if you're in that situation and you have that option, then maybe it might be worth paying for that space. And that way you're kind of going into the situation with your eyes open. Now, in your case, you got to park a mile away. Well, you might like look at that and say, okay, so I get my steps in that way and I can cut down my time in the gym a little bit. So that's how I'll balance that out.
Fair.
But it's really about knowing what your situation is and thinking through each of the offerings that are presented to you so you can make the best choice for you.
Mhm. Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about apartments. I in what I envision and where I'm at right now too. Our apartment is owned by a large real estate group. How does and I'm assuming you're going to favor negotiate at least have like renting with smaller investors because there might be some more negotiation power there. But how does negotiating with small real estate investors differ from corporate real estate groups?
So when you're dealing with a smaller investor, you're talking to the owner. They can decide to do whatever they want to do. When you're talking to an investment group, the person who sits in the office that you first meet essentially has no power over pricing, but they are the person who will then go and make your case to their boss. So it becomes much more important to have your case fully fleshed out when you present it to that person. And typically, your case is going to be something like this. I've been in this property for a year as a renter. All of my rent has been paid on time. There have been no noise complaints from my apartment, whatever. I've gotten along with all of my neighbors. Um, and I've been a consistent resident. I saw your renewal offer that came in the mail. Took a look at that, and I'm not really comfortable with the numbers in that offer. This is what I'm more comfortable with, and these are the reasons why, and it makes more sense to agree to these numbers rather than roll the dice on a new resident. And then you can talk about vacancy and cleaning and the other costs that they're going to have associated
Yeah,
with
let's
re-renting that.
let's actually get into that because I don't think people realize there is, I would say, a pretty significant cost with changing a resident. So, can you outline some of the expenses and kind of illustrate through an example what that cost might be?
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of costs. The first cost is the vacancy, which we've already kind of discussed. But the other costs include cleaning. The apartment is going to need to be cleaned. Um, there are costs in terms of getting a new resident. So when they put their property on one of these apartment listing services, and you click on that nice picture, and you're like, "Oh yeah, that'll be great." Blah blah. I'm going to go rent there. If you actually rented that property, they have to pay a fee to that website company for because that company referred them to you and they signed the lease. So there's costs associated with that. And there may actually be repairs that need to be made in the property, painting, fixing cabinets, flooring, that kind of thing. there's all of this, there's all of this other expense and time that is involved in preparing that unit for that next person. And that expense and time, you as a person who's currently living in an apartment, you're in charge of whether they have to pay for that stuff or not. If you stay, they don't have to pay for it. If you go, they do.
Hmm.
And that logic is what goes into this case that you're making, as far as, you know, what amount you're comfortable renewing at.
Sure.
And then that person who's in that office will then take that information to either their boss or the owner and plead that case for you.
Hmm.
Now, they're much more likely to plead that case if you present it in that way, rather than just walking into their office and whining about how much the renewal is going to be.
I mean, to back into some numbers, like if we take your earlier example with the $1,000 1-bedroom apartment, say it's got to have to sit vacant for 2 weeks, just transitioning, cleaning, etc. I mean, let's call it $500 there.
Yep.
Come out, get some cleaning done by a cleaning service, $200. I have no idea. We'll call it $200 on it.
Yeah.
Some like minor repairs,
because
$100.
Because when we're talking about the cleaning, it's not just, okay, we're gonna like mop in the middle of the floor. No, we're talking about actually opening the refrigerator, pulling everything out, cleaning all the shelves and putting all that back in, pulling out the refrigerator and the stove, cleaning behind that. So it's a deeper cleaning than just what one would typically do in their normal, in their normal everyday lives. But yeah, continue.
Yeah,
with your list.
I can see that easily adding up to, $1,000 or $1,200, which comes out to $100 or even $600. We'll call it $600 is 50. That means you have anywhere from $50 to $100 a month to negotiate. Because as you were mentioning with your earlier example too, I mean, that's almost a whole month of rent. So if they can negotiate somewhere, the delta of 0 to 100, they're still got to come out net positive from if they decided not to negotiate with you and you ended up walking.
Right. And the good news from the renter standpoint is not only do you get lower rent, but typically the advice that people get when people are talking about, saving money or whatever, it's like, don't buy that Starbucks latte every day. Right. Okay, great. So every day I got to walk past Starbucks and I got to be like, don't buy the latte, don't buy the latte, don't buy the latte. And if I stick to that, I save $4, whatever. Once you negotiate your rent, like, it's locked in, it is set for a whole year. You don't have to think about it anymore. It's done. And that to me is a lot simpler and easier than to have this psychological battle over this latte that I want to have in the morning.
Yeah. Amen to that one. I mean, saving $600 to $1,200 on rent over a year. I mean, it can be a lot of lattes that add up and a whole less willpower that you got to make over the next year.
Exactly. And people typically don't think of rent as a place where they can save money, because as we started this conversation, people don't even think about negotiating on the rent.
Yeah. I mean, there is just so many opportunities to negotiate. Even something like my lease that's coming up now, we couldn't meet entirely on where I wanted to be in terms of price point, but they came back to me. They got rid of a couple one-time fees that were going to be associated with the renewal. They threw in a carpet cleaning as well, which is something that I negotiated. There's so much more room. What else can people negotiate? Either signing a new lease and or the renewal.
So you can actually negotiate for upgrades to the apartment, whether that be flooring, paint, appliances, sometimes cabinetry, depending on the situation. You can negotiate for those things. You may also be able to negotiate parking privileges. I may have to agree to the renewal rate on the apartment, but I may be able to get some money knocked down on the cost of my parking space. So there are a number of different opportunities for negotiation on things other than just the rent amount.
Justin, man, you are full of wisdom. I love that you filled a void in the market. There's plenty of books out there for real estate investing. There's some books out there for property management. There's not a lot of people out there giving guidance to future renters. I really, really appreciate that you wrote this. Once again, your book is called Rental Secrets, subtitled Reduce Your Rent, Get Better Value, and Create Quality Communities. As I mentioned, all your chapters go through the same structure, the power of. We talked about many of those powers in this conversation, but there's still, I think, a ton that people can gain from picking up and reading your book. Where can people find your book?
Yeah, so people can absolutely find the book at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, like all the usual suspects online. They can also pick up a copy at rentalsecrets.net. If they want to reach out to me directly, they can email me at justin@rentalsecrets.net as well. And they should also check out my social media platforms, because I post a tip for renters every day, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and what am I leaving out? Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love seeing your tips on LinkedIn too. So totally worth it. If you are a renter or going to be a renter in the future, worth the follow. Pick up some great nuggets there. Justin, it's been a pleasure. I am super stoked that you came on. You helped me with my negotiation for my renewal. So at minimum, you got one. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a great time. Thanks, Justin.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you like this conversation today, be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified about new episodes. If you want to connect with me, send me a message on Instagram. I'm at Justin Lee Peters. You can find show notes with links to everything we discussed today at justinpeters.co. This episode was produced by Gabby Dimeke. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Thanks for tuning in.